Why most investors fail, the psychology that you are projecting onto price. And of course, we can't rant about this issue without a resolution. And this is actually going to be a video that is directly taken from the Crown Trading Bible with regards to psychology for both long-term investing and short-term trading as well. You can apply these principles in the exact same way. This is knowledge that I've gained over the past 15 years, incrementally over time and put it together. And I believe that this is the most important insights that I've learned during this time. Now, I want to state before we get into this presentation that this is going to go perhaps into some realms of obscurity in which you may think, wow, Crown, you've really jumped off the deep end over here. But I can assure you, I can back these things up psychologically and physiologically. And more importantly, I am open to being wrong about this. However, it has been an incredibly important framework towards myself, especially with long-term investing, that has definitely facilitated, well, good decision making. And unfortunately, we as humans intuitively, our natural decision-making processes are not necessarily great for investing or trading. It's kind of going against us. So I wanted to document the issues in this presentation, then go over the roadmap as to how you can fix those issues. Of course, in the Crown Trading Bible, this whole roadmap is extrapolated upon with concrete examples and all of this good stuff. And that's another, 3 to 4, or sorry, more close to about 5 hours long worth of content. And then another, I would say at least 3 months of consistent integration in order to fully cement these knowledges into your mind and actually make them, more or less just automatic. Anyways, I want to start off with this quote right here, and I think that it accurately encompasses everything that we're about to go over. And it is this: the market doesn't take your money. Your unintegrated psychology hands it over. In other words, if you have not integrated your psychology in the way that we're going to go over in this presentation, well, you are naturally over time just going to continue to hand over money to the market. It's not really handing money over to the market. You're handing it over to someone else who has better integrated their own psychology. Or maybe they just got lucky. That's what's possible as well, of course. But naturally, over time, we go over probabilities, and that is going to generally be correct. Anyways, let's jump into it right now with the first slide as I get through this presentation. And let's discuss the core problem. Zoom out first, perhaps. So the markets reward patience, delayed gratification, and probabilistic thinking. All of these things I have a strong conviction of. Without all these three things, you will not be successful over a long period of time. You can have, successes here and there, but over a long period of time. We're not talking about, over a week or two. We're talking about 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 years, for forever, basically. These things must be integrated. Humans essentially evolved for immediacy, threat detection, and certainty. This is the core issue that we are dealing with. Again, this is our long-term hardwiring that we have over hundreds of thousands of years of evolution as anatomically modern Homo sapiens, and this is more or less hardwired into us for the most part. Yes, there's some psychos out there that don't necessarily deal with this. They might be good at trading and investing, but they're going to have issues in other realms. But naturally, this is not an insurmountable issue. We can overcome this through integration. Anyways, that mismatch creates predictable failure models, as we just went over. Until we fully integrate this, we can expect the long-term, the expected value is 0 or just failure, basically. Anyways, from a psychological standpoint, we're going to go over stuff from Kahneman and Tversky. We're also going to go over stuff from my personal favorite psychologist, and who I believe is perhaps maybe the smartest or most insightful human being, at least that I'm aware of, which is Carl Jung. But from Kahneman and Tversky, we can learn that losses do. They did studies on this, by the way, and they found that a loss of some financial value feels 2 to 2.5 times more painful than an equivalent gain feels good. That is to say, if I were to gain $10 just out of nowhere, that won't feel as good as gaining about $20 to $25. Those would have about the same sort of satisfaction rates in terms of what that actually would mean. So I could lose $10 or gain, $20 to $25. Those have the same sort of emotional stimulation, is the point that I'm trying to make. Physiologically, The loss activates the amygdala. That is your threat center in your brain. We all have one, hopefully, unless you've been truly lobotomized, maybe. But that triggers a cortisol and adrenaline response. And so your body will then enter into a fight or flight mode. This is the mode that we've discussed in previous presentations, in which you are essentially blocked off from making logical decisions when you're in that fight or flight mode. Why? Because your body wants to just only conserve energy towards the immediate issue, which is fighting your way out of this issue or running away as fast as you can. It doesn't want to, it doesn't want to siphon off energy to, hey, maybe we should think about this in a logical way and step back and, sit down for 5 minutes and really concentrate on this issue. No, this is get the fuck out of here because we are under real threat. And of course, your body's main purpose is to conserve or more or less make sure that you are safe until you have reproduced at least, at least a few times. Anyways, not counting, rubbing and tugging your peignoir, but the investing consequence here is that people generally sell after drawdowns. Why? Because they enter into that very nasty state in which their loss is activating their amygdala, the threat center. They feel threatened. You're losing money. You feel a threat because you interpret that as losing some portion of your identity, as we typically do identify with our financial situation. And because of that, you enter into that fight or flight scenario, and you generally will take an action at that point, which is to sell, to end the immediate pain. Anyways, you feel during that decision that you're avoiding danger, but actually you're just locking in a loss, obviously. And so the translation here is that your nervous system treats a red dildo like a predator. Long-term investing requires overriding a biological system that is screaming at you to act. It's basically saying, hey, you have a real threat here. There is a fucking tiger that is chasing you down. It's going to eat you alive. It's going to eat you fucking ass first alive. So, it's going to take some time to get to the, the vital organs. So, that's going to be very, very painful. So we need to end this threat as quickly as possible. Thus sell, thus get the hell out and lock in whatever loss. Anyways, we also, of course, deal with recency bias, and that's basically just short memory, long-term damage. So in that prior example, you're probably thinking, well, yeah, you're locking in that loss right now, but you're ignoring the potential in the future. Well, you're thinking logically because you're not a threat at the exact moment. You also are applying something called a recency bias. And psychologically, humans overweigh recent experiences when predicting the future. This also makes just, investing or trading quite difficult naturally. Physiologically, your brain conserves energy by extrapolating from recent data, sometimes a little bit too recent, as the bias would imply. It's metabolically cheaper than long-range modeling, of course. What is easier? Just looking at the past few days of price action. I think that's generally why people like to gravitate towards very low-term timeframes such as this, a 5-minute time frame, instead of going out to a monthly. It's like a 5-minute time frame might be down only for the whole day, but if you go out to a monthly, you might be in an uptrend, for example. Not always, but just as an example. Anyways, investing consequences. Well, in bull markets, people expect permanent growth. It's going up. It's going to go up for forever. Why? Because it went up, 5% yesterday. That's crazy. It's going to do it again, right? And we need to maximize those gains. Bear markets, people expect permanent decline. Again, same thing. Perma bears and perma bulls. It's the same disease, just applied to opposite sides of the coin. It is the same disease, though. This is why I say perma bulls and perma bears, both perma retards. They will permanently lose over time because the markets don't go up for infinity and they don't go down for infinity. I guess if you had to bet on one direction, up would be better, but still, you are going to come into tumultuous periods, especially if you are applying leverage because you have to survive those drawdowns. So at least in general upside assets, you can get away a little bit more with that. But, on the other hand, if you find a shitcoin that's down only, well, you can do the same thing on the other side as well. Again, these can be applied in extreme cases, of course, but I do want to address, the normal situation here. Anyways, buying high, selling low becomes rational in the moment during these times. Of course. And the translation here is that the brain confuses what just happened with what will always happen. We are fighting this internal bias. We all have it in some sort of spectrum. We all of these issues that we're going to go over today are spectrum issues. You might not have an extreme case, but you probably have at least some. And to acknowledge that is important in order to integrate it, which we'll go over later. Anyways, oops, I just went backwards. There we go. Action bias. Okay, here's another bias that we deal with that does make investing and trading rather difficult. Something to be aware of again. Action bias. Doing something feels safer than doing nothing. It's just we want to take action because it feels like we are actually, making some sort of progress, in which many times the best action is no action, or perhaps a rushed action is worse than no action. Anyways, the psychology here is that humans prefer action over inaction generally when the inaction is optimal. Even when the inaction is optimal, I should say. Physiologically, action gives dopamine, which is kind of like a reward chemical. It makes you feel like you are accomplishing some sort of a goal. So it makes you feel good. It makes you feel like you're making progress, even if you might not be. Again, in trading and investing, sometimes taking an action is worse than taking no action. In fact, many times in long-term investing, especially, taking no action is the best route of action. Anyways, inaction generally feels like helplessness. So your investing consequences here, of course, many people know this. I know it myself. Over trading is the big one. Just making decisions when there's really not a decision to be made, thus forcing things, thus not playing out whatever strategy you may have created, and thus you cannot trust in whatever strategy that you're looking at because you're quite literally not playing it. You're just winging it more or less. Constant strategy changes. Again, strategy hoppers. It's like most people can figure out one strategy, but they get bored because why? Because you want to be doing something all the time. I mean, if you're going to be a trader or investor, then what sort of action makes you that identity? Well, investing or trading. So intuitively we think, oh shit, I need to be trading all the time in order for this to make sense. I know I definitely dealt with this when I was first beginning trading. I thought before I really stepped into the realm as a professional that a trader would be like working out little maths equations like all the time on a pen and paper, and they would always know what to do in exactly that moment. There was something to be done, basically a trade to be made. I couldn't have been further from the truth. I was completely wrong on that. And in fact, the majority of my career is kind of unlearning that intuitively but incorrect, piece of information. Anyways, and then of course, the other one is just going to be abandoning plans mid-cycle. You draw out your major cycle long plans. I'm going to do this around this time. I'm going to do that around that time. When I get this signal, I'm going to do that. When I get that signal, I'm going to do this. And of course, once you get further on into the cycle, you forget where that's where that strategy breakdown is, or maybe you just abandon it because you have new information, which is recency bias and yada yada. You already know where this one's going. The translation here is that doing nothing feels like dying, even when it's the winning move. In many cases, it is a winning move, especially as a long-term investor. This is why simple strategies beat complex ones almost always. And I say this as someone who has spent so many fucking years, so many fucking hours really drawing out like some pretty complex strategies that theoretically make sense. Mathematically, it is addressing very, very, very deep concepts. And ultimately, when I put these strategies to the test, some of them do actually quite well. But the best strategy that I have are honestly literally the simplest ones. One, because it's easier to follow, and two, because when you're in the moment, you're going to understand that intuitively a lot better than some sort of complex, very theoretical mathematics concept, which really does have a lot more points of failure or potential failure, which again, when you're in an intense moment, it's very easy to get caught up in that and very easy to fuck things up. Anyways, moving into the next one, we have the overconfidence or the ego trap. This is a big one. Psychologically, people consistently overestimate their skill. Naturally, this usually happens, especially when you're at the beginning of your career. You get some early successes. I know that I had this myself. When I first stepped into the market for the first couple of years, I was like generally successful. It was also a rather easy market, I should say. And then, of course, I overestimated my skill, and that was the core issue that led to my initial downfall, in which I actually went full on broke. Now, this, like the next point iterates, is especially after short-term success. Also a recency bias type thing. You just had a few successes, you think you're going to continue that. No, it is over the long term. Even when we have a good setup, we're not going to win every trade, and we're going to have periods of insane losses. I mean, shit. Like, I'll show you what I think is a rather good strategy that is probably going to trade better, especially than most people on the short-term time frames for the hourly quantum wave bands right here. But when I put it on, you will see that there are periods, long periods of losses, even though over time it produces a net gain. Now you can see right here, there was a period from here in about March of 2024 all the way until July of that same year, where it was, sideways and down, not really making money, not really losing money. And then from there, yes, it does go up. My point is, can you imagine taking 2 months of basically just spinning your wheels and having general losses as well? Of course, it's going to feel terrible. It's going to feel terrible, but it's the long-term edge that produces gain. And so we must respect that and the way to respect that is just play it out regardless of how you feel. Anyways, and regardless of whether you had a short-term success or short-term failure, again, it's a long-term edge, and just following that, which is a simple thing to do. It's just very difficult psychologically because we're fighting our own internal battles. Anyways, physiologically, when spiked dopamine, again, dopamine reduces risk perception also from a sort of what's called chemical way in our body. I'm looking for a better word than that, honestly. Hormonal way. So it reduces our risk perception, which obviously is going to be terrible when we get overconfident, we start to oversize, we start to get even more aggressive. And of course, those sort of emotions are not conducive to playing out a plan. Thus, we start to deviate even more and more. And at some point, it will catch up. And generally, whatever wins you had before almost always get unraveled or more, or even worse. Anyways, the investing consequence here, this is leverage at the top, like leverage longing at the top, oversized position, ignoring downside risk, just thinking that you are impervious to such things because it hasn't happened recently, thus getting your overconfidence. And naturally, it is just inevitable that this situation will indeed happen. It is inevitable. Anyways, the translation here is that success intoxicates the brain, and intoxicated brains make reckless bets. You're not going to be thinking logically during these times, and we need our logical thought-making processes to excel at this business. This is why bull markets destroy more people than bear markets. Quite literally, I've seen this time and time again, especially in the crypto space. People come in almost always during the most fun times near the last few months of the cycle. I'm talking about over here in the summer, for most of 2021, especially the summer of 2021 and 2017 for the majority of the year as well. And even the beginning of the 2013 cycle over here. All of these had the same sort of characteristics in which people joining at these times, they see Bitcoin having amazing gains in a short amount of time and altcoins having astronomical gains in a short amount of time. They think that is normal. They think that, 20% days to the upside is it's a foregone conclusion. It can happen out of nowhere, and it does happen often, but it does not. These are very, very small specks of time where things like that, magical things like that, do happen. And yeah, they do happen. I mean, maybe not necessarily this cycle, to be honest, but still, my point is that we unfortunately get overconfident in that regard. Anyways, moving on from there. We also have the issue with social proof and herd behavior. The psychology here is that humans evolved to survive in groups. Why did humans survive to evolve, or why did humans evolve to survive in groups? Because, well, that's how we were getting around. We had tribes of 100 to 150 people, and the general thought here is that if you got excommunicated from that tribe, if you got pushed out from that tribe for whatever reason by deviating from their rules or norms, you were effectively dead, because one human out in nature, like 50,000, 100,000 years ago, is dead. It's just food for another animal. Now, because we have this condition over such a long period of time, it is still inherent, it is still innate in our psychology, even though we don't have that same issue as of right now. You can be outside of the group in today's day and world. It's not going to be a death sentence in the way that it was, many years ago. But anyways, the key point here is that if everyone is doing something, it feels safer. It feels safer, but it might not actually be safer. I love this image on the right-hand side over here. When the herd is all running towards a cliff, the one running in the opposite direction seems crazy. Very true. However, we do have all of these psychological issues for good reason, because generally, I mean, you actually do want to listen to your social conditioning. I mean, shit, do you want to, because everyone's avoiding putting their hand on the stove, does that mean you should put your hand on the stove? Well, Obviously, fucking no, unless if you don't like having a hand or you like having a massively burnt hand, that's probably not usable anymore. So a lot of this is for good reason. So don't throw everything out, but just be aware of these, because there are probably some situations, there are naturally some situations at least, in which this is absolutely true, and you do want to be that one person going the other direction. Anyways, physiologically, social alignment reduces stress hormones. Being contrarian feels threatening at a visceral level. Again, it's all about the threat. It's all about the perception of threat. And in this case, it's a survival threat as well, because of that prior conditioning. Anyways, the investing consequence here is, of course, people buy what's popular. Again, during these times, when Bitcoin's going to the moon and beyond, or whatever's going to the moon and beyond, you're going to find some of these shitcoins that are going to the moon and beyond as well. And then you start to get a lot of people riding those gains. It feels safe because many people are doing it. What happens soon after that, whether it be a month later, a few months later, or maybe even a year later, usually ends in tears. Selling when panic spreads, of course, we all know this as well. Downside is the easiest way to take off these emotions as well. And then fear of missing out, very, very powerful as well. But loss generally is a greater motivator than gaining something. But yes, all these ones do matter. Anyways, the translation here, the market punishes tribal thinking generally. Anyways, we also have time inconsistency bias as well. That would be your present self versus your future self. And I think that the graphic here accurately summarizes this very, very succinctly. You are here right now. You can make all these different decisions. They have massive implications for your future, both financially and physically. And you can make these decisions at any time. But to get into this one, the psychology is people value immediate rewards far more than future ones. It feels a lot better to go on a vacation today rather than put that money towards an investment today, because you get to have fun right now. And, well, why not do it right now? I mean, we are geared towards immediate rewards. Why? Because why wouldn't you? You don't have the promise of a future reward. And it's also difficult to inherently understand how that would feel, or what that would be like, versus, having the reward exactly at this moment, even if the future reward is significantly better. Anyways, physiologically, the prefrontal cortex, which is the sort of planning portion of your brain, that's the logical thought process portion, more or less, versus the limbic system, which is your impulsive decisions. Stress, when you're having stress, it shifts control towards the limbic system. Why is that? Well, I have my own theories. This may be right, this might not be right. But basically, when you're in a stress situation, when you are in a stress situation that is threatening to your identity or your physical being, then naturally it kind of makes sense to go more towards the limbic system, which is impulsive decision making, because you need to make a different decision or an immediate decision right now, and it needs to be impulsive because we don't have time to plan. We just need to do something. Again, this usually is not the right response in our current modern day and age. We don't have the same threats as before, but that is why it does exist. Anyways, the investing consequences is that abandoning long-term plans during volatility is going to be the main point here. Of course, sacrificing compounding for emotional relief is also a major consequence. You could compound your future net worth by investing, but you could also have immediate emotional relief. And to relieve a very stressful emotional state feels a lot better right now than not. So that it feels like a positive step, even though it's not really. Anyways, translation here, your future self is calm and rational. Your current self, however, is scared and impulsive. Just be aware of this. Anyways, identity attachment. This one's a big one, and we're going to go into extreme detail because this, in my opinion, is the most important point out of this whole presentation, and that's what we're really going to hammer on. And this is, in my opinion, the way to actually solve this issue. Now, when I say it's the way to solve it, I'm not saying it's going to be fucking easy. It's going to take time and consistency in practicing, but yes, it can be done, and I believe that we do have a good roadmap for fulfilling this. Anyways, the psychology here is that people tie their identity to being smart, right, or good in investing, or you might just tie your identity to I'm a trader, and if I'm a trader, then I should be trading. And what do I need to do in order to trade? Well, I need to buy and sell right now, and maybe even simultaneously. Again, you force yourself into action, even though at your core you are none of these things. Your identity really should just be I'm a human male or a human female or a human non-binary. No, I mean, maybe there is probably like 5 people out there, but yeah, maybe not. I don't actually fucking know. But my point is that that's really all that we can identify with. Anything on top of that is not necessarily real. Whether you identify with being good, if identify with being good at investing, how can that be your identity? How can that be your identity? You either make good investment decisions or you do not. But to be an investor, that's just like it's like an alien race. It's not who we are. You're just a human being. You can't be an investor just like you can't be, a fucking pickle. Or I guess if your name is Rick, you could be Pickle Rick. But joke for another time. But anyways, the physiology here is that your ego threats activate the same pain centers as physical pain. So when you run into a situation in that, I'm supposed to be good at investing, but I just had a loss, your ego takes that as a threat to your identity, which is the same as a death threat. Because to kill your ego, to kill your identity, is to kill you if you identify with that. If you identify with, I'm a good investor, and then you have a loss, and that's not a part of your identity, well, now you fight that internal battles about, oh shit, well, I'm a good investor, but I just lost, so that means I'm a bad investor. Well, I need to make that like that. These two things cannot coexist. So we need to ensure that our identity is conducive towards anything and everything that can and will happen, and still is conducive or at least encompassing of success. You can take losses as an investor and still be a great investor, a great actual investor. In fact, every great investor needs to learn how to take proper losses because there is a time and place for that. Absolutely. Abs-fucking-lutely. So we need to integrate this very, very carefully because if we don't, we completely fuck ourselves from the ground up, unfortunately. Anyways, investing consequences here, big ones, refusing to admit mistakes. Obviously, that is going to be disastrous. When you refuse to admit a mistake, what happens? You hold on to a shit losing position because you think it's going to turn around let me go from the top down. So refusing to admit a mistake. You're in a shit losing position. You hold on to it because if you were to take a loss, that again completely contradicts your identity as being a good trader or good investor. Thus, you continue to hold on to it, hoping that it's going to turn around, thus validating your initial decision as to why you took that trade. And of course, you're a good trader, so why your decision should be right? But of course, refusing to admit that mistake, even though it is very logical, is unfortunately not the emotionally easy thing to do. Thus, you hold on to losses for longer than you should be. And what happens from there? They turn into bigger losses, maybe even liquidations. Holding losers too long. I mean, of course, these are one and the same. And then arguing with price instead of adapting. How many times have you been yelling at your computer screen, saying, fuck you, turn around, you bastard, just do, you suck, fuck you. I know I've done that many times in the past. Sometimes it even feels good, but it definitely does not help the situation, unfortunately. Translation: when your portfolio attacks your identity, logic shuts down. Again, if we have an identity that is not synonymous with reality and then is therefore contingent upon the validation from an external source or devalidation from an external source, then we have a major vulnerability which will be exploited over a long enough period of time. Usually it doesn't take that long, to be fair. Your logic will be shut down when that identity is inevitably going to run into a crossroads with reality. Anyways, here we're going to get into some crazy stuff. This is where I think that this presentation will hopefully set this apart from anything else that you'll find on YouTube. I sincerely believe that this is the most important stuff that I've learned over the past 15, maybe even 20 years. And hopefully, if I can just give you this in 20% of the way that I understand, if I can even just do that much, I think that is going to have major, long-lasting implications for anyone who can incorporate this, especially if you can do even more than that as well. But it is difficult. It does take time. And just because we have the roadmap right here doesn't mean it's like a foregone conclusion. It does take integration, of course. Anyways, I'm going to take a sip of this water, then we'll get into the fun stuff. So if you're not familiar with Carl Jung, he is I believe he was from Switzerland. He was either German or Swiss. And he was a psychologist. Some people thought that he was like on Hitler's side for whatever reason in World War II. He wasn't. It actually came out later after the war that he was reporting on Hitler's condition and all of the psychological issues that this guy was fucking going through. It's actually pretty crazy. I've actually read some of that stuff. It's super insightful, but outside of the context of this presentation, obviously. Anyways, I believe that he is the most important thinker, or at least the most important. He has found the most important insights with regards to psychology and physiology and how that all relates to each other in like very crazy but creative ways. Again, I'm open to this being wrong, but I found it to be incredibly valuable myself, and I attribute this knowledge to my overall to my overall success for one, but also to my overall ability to even integrate these lessons to begin with. It's just understanding this. So and we'll just refer to his sort of I guess form of psychology as Jungian. Anyways, so from a Jungian lens, the shadow, which we'll go into in a moment, contains fear, greed, envy, and insecurity. Markets constellate the shadow constantly. If you're unconscious of your shadow, it controls your behavior. If it's integrated, if you integrate your shadow, it becomes discipline. Now, typically people think of shadow as like the evil side of themselves. It's not necessarily always that. It's just the unconscious identity behaviors that we have with regard to our identity, if that's not like complicated enough. But basically the shadow is the things that you disown that are still a part of you. So I can say for myself, something that I went over before was greed. I always thought greed is bad because, I was brought up in a Western society and greed is bad. Greed, don't do this, don't do that. And yeah, definitely if it's unconscious, it can be bad. But of course, if it's unconscious, then you start to interpret any sort of action that you take as you getting some sort of value as, oh, I'm being greedy, I shouldn't be doing this. So then you start fighting this internal battle that, oh, well, fuck, I don't actually deserve this, and this is actually bad, and I need to disown this. So I'm just gonna push all of this to the side and just ignore it. And then what happens? Well, you already know the answer. Anyways, most investors fail because they meet their shadow in the market and project it onto price. So again, these sort of aspects of our of our identity and of our psychology, when we are unconscious of them, we start to project them onto price, and that can be a major or it's almost always a losing decision. Anyways, I hope to do better in extrapolating on this issue here. So what it means, you meet your shadow and project it onto price. In Jung terms, the shadow is a part of you that contains what you don't want to admit is there: fear, greed, envy, need for control, need to be right, status hunger, shame, dependency, impulsiveness, resentment. These are the usual things that people have a shadow with. I know I can relate to all of these. Some people might have shadows in other directions. It's usually in some way related to your cultural upbringing. But we in the West generally, resent these sort of emotions. So we try to hide and disown them rather than realizing and accepting, hey, I have greed. Like greed is a part of me. And that's okay. I can acknowledge that and I don't need to act on it. Or there are maybe even, certain instances where I need to discern, hey, I actually should be greedy here. This is where I should be looking for more. This is where I should be shameful. This is where I need to be, envious or have some control. There are time and places for these, but of course we must acknowledge them first and foremost. So if you're in the Western world, this is pretty good starting point right here. Other places in the world, I can't speak towards because I didn't grow up there. We don't have the same culture. It might be different. It might be the same. I really don't know. So I just don't want to pretend that this is true for everyone. Anyways, markets are a perfect shadow machine because they do three things simultaneously. They're ambiguous, so there's no clear truth in the moment. They're social. There's constant comparison to others. Whenever you go on X and you see someone posting a massive fucking P&L shot, you're like, oh shit, man, this guy's fucking great, and I'm not even doing 1/10 the size of this guy. And then, of course, they directly threaten security and status. Because we, again, in the Western world especially, generally equate money as equivalent to survival and rank. If you have more money, you have higher survivability and higher status or rank. And if you have lower, then you have lower status and survivability as well. And in some ways, it's kind of true in a way. So you can understand why these happen, like why we have these adaptations, even though it's not great for us. Anyways, so when price moves against you, your unconscious doesn't just interpret numbers moved. It interprets I'm unsafe, I'm losing something, I'm losing status perhaps, I'm certainly losing finances, or I'm stupid, or I'm losing control. All of these things can, of course, completely contradict our internal identity. And that just creates, again, a cascade of other bad decisions that naturally follow after that. Because again, we're in that state of mind in which we're blocked off from logical decision making. Again, there was a lot on that at the beginning of this presentation, and a lot on that in past presentations as well. So I won't go too much into that right here. Anyways, because that's painful, the psyche does what it always does under threat. It projects. So you probably heard this meme before, as like a retort to an insult, where someone will say, "You're stupid," and then the other person will respond, "That's projection." And what it essentially means is that person is actually stupid, and they're just projecting it onto you, or whatever. I mean, that's a very simplistic example. Obviously, these go significantly deeper than that. But anyways, in the example of this projection, instead of recognizing, I'm afraid, I'm being greedy, or I'm just insecure right now, you assign those qualities to the outside object. So in these cases, price becomes a character in a story almost. And, you'll probably say things like this, or you probably at least seen people say shit like this if you haven't said it yourself, which is, the market is rigged. They're hunting my stops. This thing is going to zero. This is obviously going to the moon. This is manipulation. Everyone loves that one. Everyone else is getting rich except me. Or why do I always lose? Or why do I always buy at the wrong time? All of these, and I'm going to say some very... Okay, I won't say some extremely offensive stuff, but these are basically child psychology is what it actually comes down to. And if you go deeper into Jung, what you find is that in order to fully mature, you must fully integrate all these things. So whenever I see someone saying shit like this, I just think, that's a fucking kid, that's a child. And yeah, sometimes I do it myself as well, just like screaming at the fucking, ether. But I also like to acknowledge it and just realize, oh, fuck, I'm being a fucking kid right now. Grow up, take responsibility. It's basically what it comes down to. But, that's in my opinion, how I hear it. That's in essence why I sometimes have a little bit of fun during live streams, pushing back on people who are blaming the evil market makers for doing this, or this is rigged. It's like, where do you even start with that? Well, maybe this presentation. Anyways, sometimes manipulation is real. That does happen, by the way. But projection is when your emotional need becomes the explanation and you stop seeing reality cleanly. Price isn't just price anymore at that point. It becomes a mirror your ego can't look into. So it looks away and blames the mirror. I'm going to repeat that statement again because I think it's the essence of this issue, and it can't be overlooked quickly. Price isn't just price anymore when you're in this state. It becomes a mirror your ego can't look into because it contradicts your identity and reality. So it looks away and blames the mirror being price or the chart. That's intense, man. Anyways, the two most common shadow projections in investing. So one, we have the fear shadow. So we could just call it fear again. You don't if you don't like shadow, if that just sounds too fucking woo woo bullshit to you, that's fine. Just fears is okay. And this essentially propagates the catastrophe narrative. So you feel fear and helplessness. That's the shadow. You can't tolerate that vulnerability. Of course, you don't want to admit that you're fearful, that you're losing money, or that you're helpless, that, prices move and you don't understand it and you're just losing more and more. And you feel like you can't stop it. So you convert it into certainty. Again, uncertainty is always not preferable in comparison to certainty, even if we don't quite literally know what it is. We will make up a story to justify that. So, examples of this are you start saying it's over, or it's going down to literally zero. It's going up to 1 million. This time is different. We're going to crash 50%. I need out now. All these things are statements you've either said or you've heard yourself. I know I've said them. Like, again, and I'm not like trying to fucking scold people doing this presentation. This is really for me at the end of the day. Like, this is just a reminder of, of all of these truths. And I hope that it can be valuable to other people as well, in the way that it has been to me. Anyways, certainty is soothing. It gives your nervous system relief, but it usually makes you sell low. You feel certain, oh, it's over. It's crashing right now. I need to get out. What do? You sell right now. You feel like you took an action. That gives you a little bit of dopamine, makes you feel a little bit better about doing something. Your recency bias is telling you it's going to go down only because it's just been going down for the last few days. And then what? You deviate from your plan if you even had one to begin with, and you sell at a massive loss. Anyways, shadow signature, urgency, doom, certainty. I must ask. I must act. My lisp getting in the way right there. Anyways, a little bit of water to help that one out too. Urgency, doom, certainty. I must ask. That's a signature. All right. Then we also have greed or grandiosity shadow, which is the destiny narrative. And I put this picture right here of this guy. You might know him. He was big back in like 2011, 2012. He was this Australian bodybuilder. He started out as like this super skinny kid, and then he became very, very jacked and in great shape. And then I think he died in like a sauna, taking, too many drugs or something like this. And when he was only like 23 or 24, he was very young. Anyways, he said this line that became like the rallying cry for people who want undeserved success, saying, we're all going to make it, bro. Now, this guy probably did deserve his success. For all intents and purposes, he seemed like he was a cool guy. But for whatever reason, this line really, really caught on with a lot of people. And it caught on, in my opinion, in the wrong way. And all these people basically took this line on as if they were deserved success for, more or less existing or putting in minimal effort. And the idea here is that it's your destiny to succeed. You're going to make it. You're going to make it. And you probably heard this, especially in 2021. It's like, we're all going to make it. We're all going to make it. No, we're not all going to make it. It's not our destiny. We're not deserved anything. It doesn't also mean that we're deserved, failure. It's just, we can't rely on that. That's just a fucking empty platitude. It's bullshit. Anyways, you feel envy, hunger, and status, or the status need, basically. Like, you want a higher status, you need food, and envy, you want a better position, and you convert it into destiny. This is the one. I'm early. It can't go down. If I don't size up, I'm missing my chance. How many fucking times have you heard this? I heard this so many times in the past cycle, and even in this current cycle. And again in 2017 as well. I've heard it in every cycle, basically. I've heard it all my life. I've probably also said it a few times as well. People thinking that they need to, go all in at this moment in Bitcoin at 100x leverage, or, go all in on their whatever the shitcoin of the day is. And this is my chance. It can't go down. I am destined to make it. I'm destined to make it. I'm going to fucking do it, man. I'm going to raise my status. I'm finally going to get laid, and I'm going to be able to afford these people are usually obsessed with cars and shit like that. But look, I don't have nothing against cars. Look, I just bought my own truck. I love it. It's amazing. It's probably the best purchase that I've had in a very, very long time. But so I can't hit on that too much. But just, as a weird acknowledgement. Anyways, this often makes you buy high and over leverage. Again, because you just have that overconfidence, basically. And that's related to the overconfidence bias, of course. In a way, this one's coming at it from a slightly different angle, of course, but yes, you basically you run into this sort of narrative that I am going to make it. Where does this come from? I actually really don't know. I really don't know. I have some theories. I'm sure Jung had theories as well, but I guess obviously it comes off the back of greed and grandiosity. But to think that you are just deserved of success. I don't know what it is. But whatever it is very bad. And again, I've dealt with this myself as well. I'm sure other people have too. It only leads to pain and tears. So a concrete example here, play by play, we're going to go through it, in all different stages. There are 5. So let's say you're long a position with a long-term plan. Price drops 12% in a week. This is the different stages that your body goes through as you experience a situation. So stage 1, the body reacts first. before your thoughts even form, your heart rate starts to go up. You start to get tense. Like, you might find yourself like clutching your fist or like flexing your muscles, or in some way like kind of, getting more activated, like muscularly, in a way. Your sleep gets lighter generally. If you have a sleep tracker, it's super easy to find out, by the way. You check charts more often. Like, of course, we all know this. You got it on your phone. You're literally looking at it like every 5 seconds. You look at it once, you close your phone, you bring it up again 5 seconds later, and this is supposed to be like, a long-term position. And you're looking at the price again. You're like, what the fuck am I doing? Anyways, that's cortisol and a threat response. That is the initial wave. Again, it starts with your body reactions first. Stage 2, the ego then feels threatened. So basically, hormonally leads to psychologically the ego being the psychological part. So you start thinking, not my portfolio is down, but I might be wrong. That is a much more difficult thing to acknowledge than my portfolio is down. My portfolio is down is a correct analysis of this. If you're losing money, it's like, okay, my portfolio is down. That is a factual statement. It is a factual statement. That is actually what is happening. But I might be wrong is a statement that my identity is now under threat. And if my identity is under threat, my survival is under threat, which is much deeper and very, 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 very bad for producing the conditions necessary for logical thinking. Anyways, and deeper, if I'm wrong, I'm not who I think I am. Again, that is akin to your identity being killed. And we don't want, you don't want that. You might want that. Your identity does not. You might want it in your most pure form, but your identity, it does not, because that means the death of it. And of course, it doesn't want to die. Anyway, stage number 3. The shadow comes knocking. Unowned feelings show up. And when I say unowned, I mean, this is where you just don't acknowledge these feelings, or you try to push them off. You are not integrating and incorporating them as a part of you. Anyways, they show up, and you start having fear of being a sucker, or fear of poverty, even if you're, far from it. I can tell you this still happens even today for me when I don't really have major money issues. Knock on wood. Of course I can always come back. Look, that's one lesson that I've learned. Never think you're too far ahead. Shame of looking dumb, anger at lack of control, envy of people who sold the top. All of these are ways that these feelings can show up. And of course, there's many more as well. Stage 4, we start to project that onto price. So now the mind creates a story to avoid facing those feelings. So we deny the truth of the situation, and instead our mind creates a story in order for our identity to continue to survive, because our identity can't survive if we just face reality as it is. Like, hey, I made a bad trade, my portfolio is going down. That's okay. On to the next one. Or even more accurate, I'm going to take some losses. That's fine. We'll take the loss right now. Let's get ready for the next, for the next opportunity. But of course, if you don't do that, then you start to project it onto price, fighting this battle to save your identity, a badly formed identity that is, again, contingent to external validation and devalidation, which is very big vulnerability. But of course, while you save your identity, you destroy your net worth. Anyways, so this can look like, this is distribution. I knew it. Market makers are dumping. This asset is trash. Macro is broken. How many times have you heard that one? This is manipulation. Again, this is just, that has got to be the most key statement for just, okay, you're just immature, man. You're just immature. Just accept the loss. It's okay. We all lose. Doesn't make you a loser, but this is a loss. You've taken a loss. You made a bad decision. It's not manipulation. Just is what it is. Anyways, notice what just happened in all these instances. You moved from uncertainty and feelings to having a certainty and story, which feels a lot better. It makes you feel secure. And so you satisfy that part of yourself physiologically. So you start to get pumped with, soothing hormones in a way. The story feels intelligent. How many times have you heard it? Some of that sounds really correct too, but it's usually just emotional self-defense. doesn't matter that it's intelligent. It's factually incorrect, and even if it wasn't incorrect, I mean, it still leads you to the wrong action anyway. So it's bad on both counts, no matter which way you look at it. Anyway, stage 5, this is the last one: behavior that solves feelings but not the problem. Again, is what happens when you have a poorly formed identity. You solve the feeling rather than the actual problem, because in that state with a bad identity or just a poorly formed identity, you know, you don't care about the problem. You care about preserving your identity. That the emotional impulse to do that is so strong that you will forgo solving the actual issue, which is ultimately changing your identity and what you link it to. Anyways, you sell to stop this pain. And the moment you sell, cortisol drops, you get relief. You probably felt this yourself. I know I have, like holding a very, very bad position for a long time. And then at some point you just kind of capitulate yourself. And the moment that the moment that I lock in that loss, I actually feel good because it's over. it's over in a way. Now, obviously, you don't want that in the final analysis, but yeah, at this stage, you know, that's kind of what it looks like. And that relief trains your brain. Even worse, that panic selling works because it reduced discomfort. Again, you're going after the emotion rather than the actual problem. Like, that's so fucking key. And so once you start to do these behaviors continually, you just lock in that behavior for a longer amount of time. The more you do something, the more your brain etches in the neuronal pathways that are associated with that action. Thus, it makes doing that action easier in the future to save energy within your brain. It's actually a very genius system, but of course, when it's not positioned properly, it can lead to serious issues. One of which we're going over here. Anyways. So then price recovers later and you feel regret, self-hatred, need to get back in, get back what was mine. And of course that leads to chasing, and that's the whole doom loop. And many people know this. I know I've dealt with it myself in the past. I'm sure many people know it in the future as well. It's a fucking bad one. Anyway, it's the Jungian punchline. The shadow doesn't go away because you ignore it. It goes underground and controls you from below. Again, it will control you in some capacity. I have a very strong conviction on this. I believe this is 100% true. Can I prove it? I don't know if that can actually truly be proved, but I can assure you I've experienced it, and I've seen other people experience it in so many different forms that I have that conviction personally. In markets, the unintegrated shadow equals reactive behavior. When you have not integrated your shadow, or you've not positioned your identity in a proper way, you will then be vulnerable to making reactive decisions, not proactive decisions that were ideally created before even taking the trade or the investment or whatever it was. Integrated shadows equals rules, humility, patience, risk control. All of these things are ideal, not just for trading and investing, but in almost every other facet of life as well. We can admit failure. It doesn't make you a failure. Just because you had a failure does not make you a failure as a person. It doesn't make you a worse person. It just means that you failed that one time. You can try again in the future, and you have just as good a chance as making it as you do not, in a way. Anyways, the goal isn't no emotions. So this is where I think a lot of people get it wrong. Like, they want to be emotionless, and they kind of look at like stoic behavior as just having no emotions. It's not that at all. And also stoicism is not about that. In fact, I think stoicism is one of the most powerful operating systems you can, employ in your own brain. But the goal here is that emotions are observed, owned, and prevented from driving action. So the best thing to do when you are feeling an emotion that you don't want to feel is to just acknowledge, okay, I feel this way. I'm not going to act on that, but I feel that way. It's completely fine. It's actually the best way to kind of undo that emotion anyways. So here's how to tell its projection. Just a quick diagnostic, and then we'll go into the solution for this issue. Ask yourself, am I suddenly certain about an uncertain thing? It's a big one. Do I feel urgency to act right now? Another big one. Is my story emotionally satisfying? Doom or destiny? Yep. Yep. Fucking big one right there. Am I checking price compulsively? We all do this. Fucking cross that one out, man. We all do that one. Am I trying to avoid a feeling of fear or shame or chase a feeling of euphoria and status? Both of these are not what our ultimate goal is. What our ultimate goal is to simply just play out our process, which is just simply following your strategy. It's not these sort of grandiose things of achieving a major status or a terrible thing of, the shame of being homeless or something like this. No, it's just, we don't need to make it into a fucking story about any of these things. It's just bullshit. All it is a method, a means of following a strategy, which, then ultimately does create that condition, but you're not going to feel that way when you ultimately get there if you employ that sort of psychology. You're just going to feel fulfilled and not really feeling the need for status to begin with, if that happens. Or at least that's been my experience. It's a weird thing, when I would say the time, I probably don't even want to get into this too much, but I can say that the better financial position I am in, the less and less I even want to talk about finances in like in a way that's not like just strategy based or like pure informationally based. I don't want to talk about like my new things or like my new trips or where I am. I don't want to like be fucking, Instagram reeling my, my new house or shit like this. It's cool. Like I'm happy with it by myself. I don't care about the status or anything like that. So anyways, if you're not analyzing, you're regulating your nervous system through a trade. Anyways, now let's go into practical integration. So this is where, if you stayed throughout almost an hour now, I hope that you are going to get some serious value from this. This is how we can actually break this whole spell. And like I say, I'll give you the roadmap and the blueprint for this. Again, we go into it in even more detail as to how to really work through it in the Crown Trading Bible. And this video is quite literally a part of the Crown Trading Bible. I'm just going to put it in there because I think it's actually really good top-down analysis of the issue. But it's really the consistent application of what we're going to speak about that is what is going to break the spell ultimately. And some people speculate you need to do that consistently for 3 weeks. Some people speculate that you need to consistently do it for 3 months. I'm going to go on the higher end of that and just say 90 days. And, if it's less, that's great. If it's more, usually it's not. But I've noticed for myself and many other people, it usually is on the lower end of that. But I would just say start with that number in mind. 90 days. 90 days. Can you be consistent doing something for 90 days? You can, but will you? All right. So practical integration. Here's what to do instead. So when you catch yourself projecting, name the shadow out loud, literally. I feel fear of being wrong. I feel envy. I feel a need to be in control. I feel shame. It's actually really soothing just to say that if you truly feel that way. But you need to get really fucking good at naming your emotions. And unfortunately, we're not really taught this, growing up, or at least I wasn't. And so we're generally not that very, very good at it. But you can start doing this and you will get better with it over time. After you've done that, then enforce a rule, something like no position changes within 24 hours of an emotional spike. This might not always be correct, but if you're a long-term investor, this can be super, 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 super helpful. If you're a short-term trader, this might not be correct. It's better to just, at the end of the day, all of these answers come down to follow your fucking strategy. But some people, I know myself, you want to go deeper into these things. You feel like if you understand the issue, you have a better grasp of it. Thus, you're able to deal with it better. Anyways, another example could be recheck your thesis or recheck your strategy, plus your time horizon and your risk limits, and see, are we still within the confines of this, or are we operating outside of the bounds of this in which a decision is needed? But ultimately, it's good to slow yourself down at that moment. That one delay, and the key word here is delay. You need to pause before having a reaction and instead choose your response. Very important. That's what breaks the spell. And here's the core reframe. So once we break that, then we need to reframe our own interpretation. So this is equally as important. All these things need to be done. So the core reframe, you do not defeat the shadow. This is a really big misnomer. You don't defeat the shadow. You integrate it. You accept it. let's say, okay, terrible example, but let's say you have the impulse to kill someone. Don't deny that. Don't act on it, but don't deny it. You can acknowledge, I fucking want to kill this guy. But you can also then say, I'm not going to kill him. I'm not going to actually kill him. But I do acknowledge that I have that emotion that I want to do some sort of an action like this. That's the key. You don't need to act on it. You can acknowledge, you don't need to act. Acknowledge, don't act. Anyways, you design a system that makes the shadow irrelevant or works with it, because in a lot of cases, these can actually be strengths if applied in the proper instance. Most people try to feel their way to discipline. That will fail under stress, unfortunately, again, because of the physiological response to stress that we spoke about earlier here and in other presentations. Anyways, long-term investors succeed because their decisions are made when calm and executed when emotional. That's the entire game. Anyways, the 4-layer roadmap. So we'll go a little bit deeper right here, then we'll wrap this baby up. But layer number 1, awareness. That's naming the shadow. You cannot integrate what you cannot see. So this is pretty important here. This is what kind of greenlights the rest of this whole process. You need an actionable rule. Whenever you feel a strong urge to act, pause and label the emotion, not the market. I'm feeling this way, not the market is manipulated. I feel like I'm wrong, or I feel like I'm failing, not the market is manipulated. The market makers are the boogeyman, and they're going to steal my profits somehow. They're going into my Coinbase account and literally taking it out of my account. I mean, if that's actually happening, that's a real problem, but probably not. Anyways, examples. I feel fear of being wrong. I feel envy. I feel urgency. I feel a need to regain control. These are all very common examples of ways that you might be labeling those emotions if you feel those emotions. This does 2 things neurologically. It activates the prefrontal cortex, which is our access to logical thoughts, and reduces the amygdala dominance, which is our sort of threat threat mode mind, or fight or flight mode of mind when that's dominating. So you're literally switching between brain regions. What is named loses unconscious power. And okay, I'm going to go kind of crazy mode right now, but this is also why you've probably seen horror movies in the past where like they really want to name, it's like a horror movie about like a fucking demon or like the devil or some shit like that. And they really want to name the devil or the demon character. And when they name it, then that gets rid of the power of the demon, or like it's expelled or something like that. I think these 2 concepts are actually related. It's just, one's in like a more metaphysical way and the other one's like obviously more, I guess, tangible. But yeah. Anyways, layer 2, separation. So this is where we decouple the emotion from action. And this is obviously critical. Emotions are allowed. Emotional driven decisions are not. Again, we don't want to disown our emotions. We want to own them, just not act upon them. So the non-negotiable rule: no portfolio changes during emotional spikes. I think this is really precisely important for long-term investors. For short-term traders, sometimes you just need to make a fucking decision, but ultimately you do want to be coming at it from a non-emotional mindset. So yes, still, I would actually have to say this does apply in both instances. Anyways, you want to define it precisely. No trades within 24 hours of panic, euphoria, compulsive chart checking, narrative certainty. Like it's obvious, these sort of things. Again, I think this a little bit better for this particular rule right here, better for long-term investing. Like think about the April liberation day for Bitcoin and just markets in general. That was over here. Yeah, that was. Or was it over here? Yeah, it was over here when price was coming down significantly. It doesn't look like much on the charts right now, but it was pretty nasty in the moment. Felt like it was down only basically. But if you would have just paused for a day and looked at the greater picture, still higher lows the whole way through, to be fair. And I probably should have done this a little bit more during that period myself. So talking to myself in this one. So why this works: emotions peak fast. Clarity returns slower. The delay breaks projection. Most bad decisions die if you give them time, But the problem is that we don't give them time because we're in that fight or flight mode. Thus, we want to make a decision now because action buys, and it makes us feel better, even though it's not better for us. Anyways, layer number 4, the identity shift. This is the integration. This is the final point. This is probably, well, this is the most important. I mean, all of them are important, of course, but this is what ties them all together. So this is the union completion. Most people secretly identify as someone who must be right, someone who must catch the big move, someone who must avoid pain, someone who must not take losses. But long-term winners identify as a steward of capital executing a probabilistic process over decades. This is why you hear me harp on probabilities so often. I'm not always going to be right. I mean, I know I'm not going to. It's literally a certainty that I will be wrong. But I know that just following the probabilistic process over time, then time becomes my ally, because the more instances that I get for setups means more potential, or it actually does quite literally equate to more gains over time. You're just a steward of the capital. A steward of the capital. I love it, man. At least that's the frame that I like to take. That has nothing in that, and that's a very pure identity. You can do that while still taking losses. You can do that while taking losses, which is actually that's the biggest impediment to all of this. Really, it's kind of based upon that, or just being wrong. Being wrong in a particular trade. I can still be a steward of capital executing a probabilistic process over decades, even if I fail on this particular instance. Why? Because I'm executing a probabilistic process, and on top of that, I'm looking at a longer time span, decades, not just this one instance. So yeah, my identity can absorb this, and it actually works with it, and it's factually true as well. So I know that when I run into this situation inevitably, because it will happen, absolutely, I will be wrong at some point, it's not going to cause me to fight an internal battle in which I confront the shadow, basically. Anyways, that identity absorbs volatility without psychological rupture. You stop asking, what is the market doing to me? And start asking, am I executing my process correctly? That really is the core reframe and identity shift here. Anyways, that's shadow integration. Fear is allowed, but not obeyed. Greed is acknowledged, not constrained. Or sorry, it is constrained. Let's try that one again. Greed is acknowledged, but constrained. You're going to have greed. It's a natural human emotion. But it is up to us to discern when to apply it. Thus, we must constrain it. The ego is present, but not in control. Always, always, always. Again, we all naturally will have an identity. We just want to make sure that our identity is conducive to the conditions that actually facilitate long-term success and not contingent upon any one particular instance, which will absolutely happen. That's the issue. Anyways, here's the ultimate insight. Long-term investing isn't about predicting the future. It's about designing a system that survives your worst psychological moments. This is why, I apply something like the LTI over here. I just want my system to tell me when to buy and when to sell. And other than that, I don't give a fuck. If I'm buying when it tells me to buy, thumbs up, check mark, I did what I'm supposed to do. I feel good. Or it doesn't even matter if I feel good. Like, it's just, I've done what I need to do. If I don't follow this system, then I've done something very poorly, and now actually have a real insight into how I fucked up, rather than just blaming Mr. Market for being mean. Anyways, the winners reduce emotional reactivity. They automate good behavior, accept volatility as a price of freedom, build identity around process, not outcomes. Very key. And ideally, the correct processes. Anyways, here is the final brutally honest question you can always ask yourself. Are you optimizing your investing systems to outsmart the market or outlast your own psychology? Because really, only one of these actually works. And now I will leave you with the last chart of the day. Has very little to do with this presentation, but I feel very much inclined to share this on almost every presentation I do. Here is the M2 money stock growing at an exponential rate. We are experiencing fiat debasement in an inflationary world. And that's where I'm going to leave you on this one. As always, I want to wish you the best of best. Again, if you want more information like this, you can check out my psychology playlist on YouTube. There's a lot of information related to this. And then, of course, the Crown Trading Bible goes through a really fucking academic breakdown of the issue. And then, of course, how to actually solve this as well. So Other than that, wish you the best as always. Take care, much love, and see you hopefully next time.